Jimmy Ryder bringing you today's newest news. The top story is, of course, Captain Marvelous's save of the city once again early this morning from an evil ploy of Mr. Richter. Unfortunately, Mr. Richter was successful in breaking out the captain's arch-enemy, Black Death. Captain Marvelous was reported to have just left the scene of the crime, probably to enjoy this beautiful morning with his assumably...
Superheroes. Everyone knows who and what they are. Men and women who have dedicated their lives to protect good from the clutches of evil. When superheroes were first introduced to young audiences in the late 1930s, they were fairly simple characters designed to combat corruption and crime. They generally represented strong, conservative Cold War ideals about what it meant to be good, and were happy and perfect characters of unparalleled morality. But in the mid-1960s, slumping sales led one creator, Stan Lee, to introduce characters that he felt would resonate more with the adolescents of the tumultuous decade, giving his heroes faults, flaws, and most importantly, tragedy.
Most people tend to look at his motto, "With great power comes great responsibility," as the role that any superhero should play. I have these great abilities, I should use them for some great purpose. But Stan Lee saw it as being something more than that. It's not just the wish fulfillment of having superpowers and then the adulation of the populace for when you come in and save the day, whether it's a city or the world or the universe itself. It's something far more intimate. It's taking on the responsibility of loved ones that you have in your life.
So, what does this mean for our heroes? It is the year 1994. Kyle Rayner had just been given the last ring of power by the last guardian of the universe, making him the one and only Green Lantern. New and inexperienced, Kyle and his girlfriend, Alex DeWitt, began exploring the exciting possibilities of being a superhero. But it took only 4 issues for this newfound power to lead to established tragedy. And Alex is strangled by a supervillain before being folded into Kyle's refrigerator for him to find when he returns home from his hard day of superhero action.
As Kyle Rayner, Green Lantern's girlfriend, she's his most immediate weakness. Besides his mother, there's no one else of greater import in his life. So when his villain, Major Force, targets him, of course he's going to target that major weakness.
So, in a male-dominated market, attacking the girlfriend becomes a powerful technique for causing as much personal anguish for the heroes. A technique done again, and again, and again. In 1999, comic book journalist Gail Simone began to wonder if the poor luck of females in the comic book world had evolved from being a useful plot device into a problematic trend. So, she created the website Women in Refrigerators.
The refrigerator site, which went online in 1999, I thought was a very good critique by Gail Simone, who had been a critic and had been a writer of comic books and a reader of comic books for years. And so it's really coming from this place of information. And she points out that female characters are treated very differently in terms of the way they may be maimed, hurt, or killed than the way male characters may be treated.
Right now, the site contains a list of over 150 characters that fall into these categories. A list that is still, to this day, incomplete. Because comics are written for primarily male readers, it can be said that the death of female characters resonates on a more emotional level for the audience. Thus, it is safe to say that Kyle Rayner is not alone in the dead girlfriend class of superheroes. In the 1970s, Peter Parker had a longtime girlfriend by the name of Gwen Stacy. Gwen had been introduced into the title in 1965, and she and Peter began a long and happy relationship. It's not a love meant to be, however, as she's thrown off the George Washington Bridge by Spider-Man's arch nemesis, the Green Goblin, in 1973. Spider-Man catches her, but may have inadvertently broken her neck with a sudden stop when he caught her ankles with his web line.
Well, today we take comic book deaths for granted. It's sort of, a repeating joke that one character dies and they'll be back in 6 months. It's gotten sort of trite at this point. But when Gwen Stacy had died, no major characters in comics had ever died, especially one that was a romantic interest of the hero. Especially one that was as representative of femininity, of wholesomeness, and just spiritual virginity as Gwen Stacy.
The death of Gwen Stacy was a powerful moment in superhero comic books, marking the first time any major superhero had failed to save his loved one. Other Marvel heroes don't fare much better. Daredevil loses his first two love interests, his lover Elektra and his wife Karen Page, to the same villain. Thinking the third time would be a charm, he married again. But no, only a couple years later, his second wife was both assaulted and driven insane. But what probably stands out as one of, if not the most popular instance from Simone's list, isn't even the actual death of a character, but rather one that radically changes the character forever. In 1988, Arthur Alan Moore writes The Killing Joke, a Batman story in which the Joker shoots Barbara Gordon, Commissioner Gordon's daughter, an alter ego of Batgirl. But it wasn't Barbara the Joker was after.
But Commissioner Gordon's suffering is a part of his journey. And Barbara Gordon's suffering is meant to affect the male characters around her. And when Alan Moore went to the editors and asked if it was okay if he crippled Barbara Gordon, because this is one of the big, iconic female characters in the DC universe, the answer he got has been quoted in journalism as, "Go ahead and cripple the bitch."
Barbara Gordon survives the gunshot wound, but her spine is injured and she's paralyzed for the rest of her life. Editors at the time deemed the character would not return.
And it's actually two other DC editors who sort of resurrected her as Oracle. Oracle already existed in the DC universe and had no identity yet. No one knew who Oracle was, this very mysterious figure. And so they said, well, maybe we can make Barbara Gordon Oracle. But it's astonishing that this really big character, really big figure in the universe, they had no plans for. No particular plans to bring her back. And again, I think that speaks volumes about the relative value that editors sometimes place on female characters.
It wasn't always such a hard and dangerous world for women in superhero comics. In fact, back in what is today known as the golden age of comics, women had a firm place as strong, independent heroes. The Phantom Lady, Sheena the Jungle Queen, and of course Wonder Woman were among the women superheroes created at the time. Even if many of these female characters, including Wonder Woman, were created with the famous idiom, sex sells, firmly in mind.
And if male readers wanted to get interested in her first because she was sexy and good looking, that was okay, as long as they kept reading for the other messages too.
Well, William Marston created Wonder Woman simply because he saw that there was a dearth of female representation in the comic genre. And when he sat down to put together this character, he went to his wife for a lot of the input.
So with strong characters like Wonder Woman kicking the crap out of every villain thrown their way, how is it that so many of these women found themselves, metaphorically speaking, in their boyfriend's icebox? The answer: the Comics Code. The Comics Code was created in 1954, a time in which people were desperately striving to obtain what they felt like was a more suitable, stable way of life. Comics were criticized for being too violent, sexual, or simply controversial. Romance comics replaced superhero titles as the industry's top seller, but all of the major companies made sure to stress the 1950s ideals of femininity within their pages.
In terms of Wonder Woman, what that meant was not showing us the Amazons very much, not showing us Wonder Woman having supportive relationships with other female characters. She'd originally had an entire supporting cast of college students, female college students, the Holiday Girls, who thought it great fun to go help her fight crime, as well as the Amazons. And those all go away in the 1950s.
And thus, these characters became supporting roles, signing their death warrants as the most immediate weaknesses for so many heroes. So is all this being unfair? Surely male heroes die in comic books. Superman's death in the mid-90s created quite a media storm, as did the death of Captain America in the early 2000s. So are male heroes capable of dying?
Black Death.
The simple answer is yes. Male heroes do die in comics, but there are a couple of notable differences between the two. For one, when male heroes of a title die, they generally have a replacement ready, waiting for them in the wings.
I'm the new Captain Marvelous.
Captain America, Batman, The Flash, the Green Lantern, and even relatively unknown superheroes like the Blue Beetle all get replaced almost immediately after their death. The second trait that separates male hero death from female character death is that generally the male characters come back. At one point, Batman even had his own spine broken, but his luck apparently was a little bit better than his old sidekicks, as he recovered in mere months. Captain America, the Green Lantern, and the Flash have all been resurrected from the dead and are once again back to their crime-fighting ways. are there other flaws in Simone's list?
When we look back on who these characters are, they've got very little publication history leading up to their death. And in the case of any comic story, heroes and the changes that affect their lives, they're brought about by some sort of violent catalyst. And as we saw with Stan Lee, it's the immediate, the representational of the larger that's going to affect the hero most. Ultimately, when we look at female representation in the comics genre, we see that female heroes are just as noble, powerful, and as resilient as their male counterparts.
Whether or not Simone's list can be taken as the last word on gender issues in comics, it has nevertheless raised an awareness for writers to work harder at incorporating strong female characters into their stories. Unfortunately, most people today aren't exposed to these worlds through comic books, but rather see them in movies. Hopefully, these filmmakers bringing these beloved characters to the big screen will learn from the decades-old battle women have been waging on the printed page.
We are who we choose to be. Now choose!
Hopefully,